They say a mafia king is only as powerful as the bloodline he leaves behind. So, when the woman he loved confessed her darkest, most devastating secret, she expected a bullet or a brutal goodbye. Instead, the boss of the city's most feared syndicate uttered a single word that shattered the underworld. The air in the private waiting room of Dr. Gregory Hale's clinic smelled of sterile alcohol and expensive lilies. Hazel Thornton sat on the edge of the leather examination chair, her hands gripping the fabric of her dress so tightly her knuckles were white. Hazel didn't fit the mold of a mafia boss's woman. In a violent, glittering world populated by razor-thin supermodels, former beauty queens, and women who looked like they lived on champagne and celery, Hazel was an undeniable outlier. She was a size 20, with soft, thick thighs, a heavy stomach, and full arms. For most of her 28 years, she had been made to feel invisible or inadequate because of her weight. She was a quiet archivist who had been hired to digitize the old ledgers of Ryland Shipping, a legitimate front for the Ryland crime syndicate. She had never expected the head of the family, Victor Ryland, to notice her. But Victor, a man carved from granite and street violence, had bypassed the glamorous socialites and locked his terrifying ice-blue eyes entirely on her. He didn't just tolerate her body, he worshipped it. He bought her custom-tailored silk dresses that hugged her curves, silenced anyone who dared to look at her sideways, and made her feel like a queen in a kingdom built on blood. But a king needs an heir. In the Ryland family, legacy was everything. Victor's aging uncle, an old-school mobster named Carmine, had made it violently clear at Sunday dinners that a boss without a biological son was a weak boss. The whispers in the syndicate were growing louder. They needed a prince to secure the alliances and prove the Ryland bloodline remained undisputed. The heavy oak door of the examination room clicked open, snapping Hazel out of her thoughts. Dr. Hale, a top-tier gynecologist on the Ryland payroll, walked in with a thick manila folder. He didn't look at her directly. That was the first sign. "Hazel," Dr. Hale began, taking a seat and adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "I've gone over the blood panels and the results of the ultrasound. Just tell me, doctor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The heavy ache in her lower abdomen, a pain she had suffered through since her teenage years, seemed to pulse in time with her racing heart. "The scarring from the severe endometriosis is far more extensive than we previously thought," Dr. Hale said softly, his clinical tone failing to mask the pity in his eyes. "Combined with your advanced PCOS. Hazel, I'm so sorry. Your fallopian tubes are completely blocked, and your ovarian reserve is practically non-existent. The damage is irreversible." The words hit her like physical blows. Irreversible. "Are you saying—" Hazel swallowed hard, tasting bile. "Are you saying I can't? You cannot conceive naturally, and given the state of your uterus, you cannot carry a child. IVF wouldn't be successful. You are entirely infertile." The room spun. Hazel's hands flew to her stomach, the soft, rounded stomach Victor held every night as he fell asleep. It was broken. She was broken. In the brutal mathematics of the mafia, a woman who couldn't produce an heir was a liability. She was a luxury Victor could no longer afford. "Does Victor know?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Medical records are strictly confidential, even from Mr. Ryland, until you give me permission to release them," Dr. Hale assured her. "But Hazel, you know the nature of the people you are involved with. You need to tell him." The drive back to the Ryland estate in the Chicago suburbs was a blur of rain and neon lights. The armored SUV glided silently over the wet asphalt, the driver, a massive enforcer named Sullivan, keeping his eyes glued to the road. Hazel pressed her forehead against the cold, tinted glass. She loved Victor. It was a terrifying, all-consuming love. He was a monster to the world, a man who ordered hits and orchestrated international smuggling rings. But to her, he was a protector. He was the man who kissed the stretch marks on her hips and told her she was a masterpiece. But she knew the rules. She knew what happened to women who outlived their usefulness to the syndicate. At best, she would be quietly paid off and exiled. At worst, if his rivals found out he was tied to a barren woman, they would view it as a vulnerability. She could be putting him in danger just by staying. When the heavy wrought iron gates of the estate swung open, Hazel had already made her decision. She wouldn't wait for him to cast her aside. She would pack her things and leave tonight. It would hurt less if she walked away on her own 2 feet. The master bedroom of the Ryland mansion was cavernous, decorated in deep mahoganies and dark velvet. Thunder rumbled over Lake Michigan, rattling the reinforced windows. Hazel pulled a vintage leather suitcase from the top shelf of the walk-in closet. Her hands were shaking violently. She didn't pack the diamonds, the Cartier watches, or the bespoke designer gowns Victor had showered her with. She only took what she had brought into this house: a few oversized sweaters, her worn-out jeans, and a pair of comfortable boots. It was a pathetic small pile of clothing that looked entirely out of place in the opulent room. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" The voice was low, gravelly, and laced with absolute authority. Hazel jumped, dropping a sweater on the Persian rug. Victor was leaning against the bedroom doorframe. He looked exhausted. His tailored charcoal suit jacket was slung over his shoulder, his tie was loosened, and a faint smear of what looked suspiciously like dried blood stained the cuff of his white shirt. He smelled of rain, expensive scotch, and the sharp tang of gunpowder. "I'm packing," Hazel managed to choke out, refusing to meet his eyes. Victor dropped his jacket on a chair. He crossed the massive room in 3 long strides, his presence dominating the space. He stopped just inches from her, his sheer size, 6'4" of pure, hardened muscle, forcing her to step back against the closet island. "I can see that," Victor said, his tone dangerously calm. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently gripping her chin and forcing her to look up at him. "The question is, why? Did someone disrespect you? Did Sullivan say something in the car? Tell me who it was, Hazel, and I'll have their tongue on my desk by morning." "No!" Hazel cried out, the tears she had been fighting finally spilling over her flushed, full cheeks. "Nobody said anything. It's me, Victor, it's me!" His brow furrowed, his thumb swiping away a tear. "Talk to me, Suo Amore. You're shaking." Hazel pulled away from his touch. It was agonizing, but she had to do it. "I went to Dr. Hale today, for the tests." Victor went incredibly still. The dangerous mob boss melted away, replaced for a fraction of a second by a man holding his breath. "And?" Hazel's chest heaved. The words felt like broken glass in her throat. She looked at this terrifying, magnificent man, the man who needed a dynasty to maintain his throne, and ripped the Band-Aid off. "I can't have kids," she whispered, squeezing her eyes shut, waiting for the disgust, waiting for the cold realization to wash over his face. "I'm completely infertile, Victor. My body has broken. I can't give you a son. I can't give you an heir. I'm useless to you." The silence in the room stretched. It was thick, heavy, and suffocating. Outside, another crack of thunder shook the floorboards. Hazel waited for him to step back. She waited for the icy distance she had seen him use right before he destroyed his enemies. But the distance never came. Instead, Victor let out a long, shuddering breath. It wasn't a sigh of disappointment. It sounded like relief. He closed the distance between them, wrapping his massive arms tightly around her thick waist, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "Good," he said, his voice vibrating against her skin. Hazel froze. Her tear-streaked face snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What? Did you just say, good?" Victor pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. His blue eyes were blazing with an intensity she had never seen before. "I said good. Thank God, Hazel. Thank God." "Are you insane?" Hazel pushed against his chest, confusion and anger suddenly overriding her grief. "Victor, the family demands an heir. Uncle Carmine, the captains, the syndicate. They expect you to breed a successor. You need a bloodline to survive this life, and I am telling you, I am physically incapable of giving you one." "Let them expect whatever the hell they want," Victor growled, his grip on her waist tightening, ensuring she couldn't retreat another inch. "They don't run my life, and they don't know the truth about the Ryland bloodline." Hazel stared at him, bewildered. "The truth?" Victor stepped away, running a hand through his dark hair. He walked over to the mahogany desk in the corner of the room, unlocked a concealed drawer, and pulled out a faded, battered leather journal. He tossed it onto the bed between them. "My father," Victor began, his voice taking on a dark, bitter edge, "was a monster. Not just a ruthless mob boss, Hazel. A true, clinical psychopath. And his father was exactly the same. They enjoyed the pain. They thrived on the torture. It's in our blood, Hazel. The Ryland men are born with a violent rot in our brains." He walked back to her, taking her soft, trembling hands in his rough ones. "I fought my whole life to control it," Victor confessed, dropping his voice to a raw whisper. "I built rules. I only kill those who step into the game. I protect the innocent. But the rage, it's always there, clawing at the back of my skull. When my older brother, Arthur, had a child 12 years ago, we saw it happen again. By the time that boy was 8, he was torturing stray dogs in the alleyway behind the warehouse. He looked at violence the same way my father did. Like it was a game." Hazel gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She had heard rumors of Victor's nephew, but the boy had supposedly died in a tragic fire, along with Victor's brother. "Arthur and his son didn't die in an accidental fire," Victor said flatly, answering her unspoken question. "The O'Connor Syndicate found out Arthur was planning a massive turf war that would have slaughtered hundreds of civilians just for the thrill of it. They burned the house down. I let them do it." Hazel stepped back, the breath knocked out of her lungs. You let them?" "I had to," Victor said, his eyes filled with a haunting sorrow. "To stop the madness. After that night, I made a vow on my brother's ashes. The Ryland curse ends with me. I will never bring biological child into this world. I will never pass on this poison in my veins." He reached out, tracing the soft curve of her jawline. "When I fell in love with you, Hazel, it terrified me. You are so full of light, so inherently good. I knew if you ever got pregnant, I would be damning you to raise a monster. I was going to tell you eventually. I was going to have a doctor secretly perform a vasectomy. But hearing this, hearing that you are safe from my bloodline," he pulled her into his chest again, kissing the top of her head fiercely. "You aren't broken, Hazel," Victor whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "You are perfect. You are exactly what I need. No heirs, no cursed bloodline. Just you. Only you." Hazel collapsed against him, her tears soaking his expensive shirt. But this time, they were tears of overwhelming relief. The heavy, suffocating weight she had carried for years lifted off her shoulders. But Victor wasn't finished. The Syndicate's demands for a legacy were still real, and the sharks were still circling. "But," Victor said softly, tilting her chin up, "that doesn't mean we can't be parents. In fact, I need you to be a mother sooner than you think." "What do you mean?" Hazel asked, her breath catching as she stared up into Victor's intense, shadowed face. Victor didn't answer immediately. He grabbed his charcoal jacket, wrapped it gently over her broad, soft shoulders to ward off the chill of the storm, and kissed her forehead. "Sullivan!" he barked toward the hallway. Instantly, the massive enforcer appeared in the doorway. "Yes, boss. Pull the car around to the private garage. We are leaving. And call Beatrice. Tell her to prepare the east wing." 30 minutes later, the armored SUV was cutting through the torrential Chicago rain, leaving the city lights behind as they headed deeper into the secluded, heavily forested outskirts. Inside the vehicle, the tension was palpable, yet entirely different from the despair that had choked Hazel just an hour prior. Victor's large, calloused hand rested firmly on her thick thigh, his thumb tracing soothing circles against the fabric of her jeans. It was a possessive, grounding touch that reminded her she was exactly where she belonged. They turned down a hidden, unpaved road that didn't appear on any GPS, eventually arriving at a sprawling, heavily fortified stone manor hidden behind iron gates and towering oak trees. "Victor, whose house is this?" Hazel whispered as Sullivan opened her door, shielding her from the rain with an oversized black umbrella. "Mine," Victor replied, guiding her up the stone steps. "But officially it doesn't exist." The heavy oak doors swung open to reveal a warm, brightly lit foyer. Standing there was an older, stern-looking woman with kind eyes. Beatrice Higgins, a former trauma nurse who had vanished from public records a decade ago. "He's in the library, Mr. Ryland," Beatrice said softly, nodding to Hazel with a welcoming smile. "He couldn't sleep through the thunder." Victor led Hazel down a corridor lined with antique bookshelves until they reached a cozy, fire-lit room. Curled up in a massive leather armchair, clutching a worn-out teddy bear, was a little boy. He couldn't have been more than 5 years old. He had unruly dark hair, pale skin, and wide, terrified green eyes that darted toward the door the moment they entered. Hazel gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest. "Hazel, this is Maxwell," Victor said, his voice dropping to a gentle, rumbling register she had never heard him use before. "Maxwell, this is the lady I told you about. This is Hazel." Hazel slowly sank to her knees, heedless of the dust on the antique rug, ensuring she was at eye level with the frightened child. "Hello, Maxwell," she said, her voice a warm, melodic hum. The boy shrank back, but Hazel didn't push. She simply smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that had always made Victor's heart stagger. She possessed a natural, gravitational warmth, her soft curves, her gentle demeanor, and her unending patience, making her the antithesis of the cold, violent world outside these walls. "His parents were civilians," Victor explained quietly, standing behind Hazel like an impenetrable shield. "His father was an accountant for a front company. 3 weeks ago, they were caught in the crossfire of a hit ordered by Uncle Carmine. Carmine wanted to send a message to a rival crew and didn't care who was in the blast radius. Maxwell was in the back seat of the car. He's the only survivor." Hazel's blood ran cold. She looked at the little boy, realizing the depth of the tragedy etched into his tiny features. "Carmine's men have been looking for the boy to tie up loose ends," Victor continued, his jaw ticking with suppressed rage. "I found him first. I brought him here to keep him safe. But a safe house isn't a home, Hazel. And Beatrice, as wonderful as she is not a mother." Victor knelt beside her, his broad shoulders brushing against hers. "I told you I would never pass on the Ryland curse. I won't create life just to feed this syndicate. But I will protect the innocent lives this syndicate destroys. I want to adopt him, Hazel. I want to raise him. I want him to be our son. The Ryland legacy won't be one of inherited psychopathy. It will be one of chosen loyalty. but I can't do it without you." Tears pricked Hazel's eyes, but this time they were born of pure, overwhelming love. She reached out, her soft, plump hand remaining palm up on the rug. After a long, agonizing moment, Maxwell slowly uncurled his tiny fingers and placed his hand in hers. "We'll keep you safe, sweetheart," Hazel whispered, her heart expanding until she thought it might burst. "I promise." Before Victor could say another word, his encrypted cell phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He checked the screen, and the warmth instantly drained from his face, replaced by the terrifying mask of the Mafia kingpin. "What is it?" Hazel asked, sensing the shift. "It's Sullivan," Victor growled, standing up. "We have a problem. Dr. Hale's clinic was compromised. A nurse on Carmine's payroll got her hands on your medical file before Hale could encrypt it." Hazel paled. "Carmine knows." "He knows," Victor said, his eyes darkening with lethal intent. "And he just called an emergency summit of the capos at the downtown warehouse. He's making his move to depose me tonight. He's using your infertility to claim the Ryland bloodline is dead, and therefore my leadership is void." The Ryland Syndicate's main warehouse was a cathedral of organized crime. Suspended catwalks crisscrossed the cavernous ceiling, and the floor was cleared to make way for a massive, rectangular steel table. Around it sat the 6 capos, the deadliest, most influential men in the Chicago underworld. At the head of the table stood Uncle Carmine. He was a ruthless man in his late 60s, his face scarred by old wars, leaning heavily on a silver-tipped cane. "Victor is weak," Carmine shouted, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls. "He has gone soft. And why? Because of a woman. A woman who doesn't even fit the aesthetic of our family. A glorified, fat secretary who brings nothing to the table. And worse, I have the medical records right here." He slammed a manila folder onto the steel surface. "She is barren. The Ryland bloodline dies with Victor. He has no heir, no future, and no right to lead us." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the capos. In their world, a king without a prince was a walking corpse. "Is that right, Carmine?" The heavy steel doors at the far end of the warehouse groaned open. The murmurs instantly died. Victor Ryland walked into the room. He didn't look like a man facing a coup. He looked like the Grim Reaper coming to collect. But what shocked the capos more than Victor's chilling composure was the woman walking directly beside him, her arm laced through his. Hazel wore a custom-tailored, deep emerald dress that hugged her lush curves and commanded absolute attention. She didn't cower. She didn't hide. She walked with her head held high, radiating a quiet, indomitable strength. "Victor," Carmine sneered, recovering his bravado. "How bold of you to bring the bakery clerk to a men's meeting. Did she come to serve the coffee? Or did she come to apologize for killing our dynasty?" Victor didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Sit down, Carmine." "I will not sit," Carmine spat. "The capos are with me. You have no heir. The family demands a legacy." "The family demands stability," Victor countered smoothly, stopping at the opposite end of the table. "And as for a legacy, you are sorely mistaken." Victor snapped his fingers. From the shadows, Sullivan emerged. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He was gently escorting a small, dark-haired boy wrapped in a miniature-tailored suit. Carmine's eyes widened in horror. "The accountant's brat! Impossible!" "Gentlemen," Victor said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Allow me to introduce my son, and the future heir to the Ryland Syndicate, Maxwell Ryland." The capos stared in stunned silence. "A bloodline is a biological accident," Victor addressed the room, his eyes locking onto each capo to ensure they understood the gravity of his words. "Loyalty, discipline, and respect. Those are choices. I am adopting Maxwell. He will be raised with the wealth of this syndicate, the strength of my guidance, and the compassion of my future wife. He reached out, intertwining his fingers with Hazel's. You think a piece of paper from a clinic makes her weak? Victor's voice turned deadly, his gaze snapping back to Carmine. Hazel has spent the last year digitizing our archives. In doing so, she uncovered something far more interesting than her own medical history. Hazel stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. She placed a sleek black tablet on the table and slid it down the steel surface. It stopped right in front of the oldest capo, a man named Harrison. If you open that file, Hazel said clearly, her archivist training shining through, you will find an untraceable offshore account under a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Over the last 4 years, nearly $20 million have been siphoned from the family's shipping revenues. Harrison tapped the screen, his eyes scanning the data. He looked up, his expression murderous. This account is tied to Carmine. Chaos erupted. The capos stood up, chairs scraping violently against the concrete. Stealing from the family was the ultimate betrayal. Lies! Carmine screamed, pointing a shaking, liver-spotted finger at Hazel. She fabricated it. The fat bitch is lying. Bang! The sound of the gunshot was deafening. Carmine dropped his cane, collapsing to his knees as blood bloomed across his shoulder. Victor stood perfectly still, the smoking barrel of his sidearm pointed directly at his uncle. The warehouse was dead silent. You disrespect my woman again, Victor said, his voice a low, demonic whisper. And the next book goes between your eyes. She is the queen of this family. Her word is my word. Her blood is my blood. He looked at the capos, who were staring at the bleeding old man with disgust. Carmine ordered the unsanctioned hit that killed Maxwell's parents to cover up his embezzlement, Victor declared. He broke the rules of our family. Sullivan, take him to the basement. The capos will decide his fate tomorrow. As Sullivan dragged a screaming, pleading Carmine out of the room, Victor turned back to his men. Are there any further questions regarding my leadership, or my heir, or my soon-to-be wife? The capos looked at the financial proof on the tablet, then at the terrified but brave little boy holding on to Hazel's soft, protective hand. One by one they bowed their heads. No questions, boss, Harrison said respectfully. Long live the Rylands. Later that night, the storm finally broke, leaving a calm, crisp silence over the estate. Hazel sat on the edge of a plush bed in the newly designated nursery, watching Maxwell sleep peacefully, his small hand still clutching his teddy bear. Victor leaned against the doorframe, watching her. He didn't see a woman who lacked anything. He saw a goddess of abundance, a woman whose soft curves and infinite heart had just saved him from the darkness of his own family's history. He walked over, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind and kissing the crook of her neck. You saved us, Victor murmured against her skin. Both of us. Hazel leaned back into his solid, muscular chest, smiling softly into the quiet room. No, Victor. We saved each other. And we're going to build an empire that actually matters. She wasn't just the Mafia Boss's woman anymore. She was a mother, a protector, and the true, undisputed queen of the Ryland dynasty. And she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that she was exactly perfectly made. Did Hazel's incredible courage and Victor's ultimate devotion leave you utterly speechless? This is proof that true power isn't about bloodlines. It's about love, loyalty, and the family you choose to protect. If you loved this intense mafia romance, full of unexpected twists and heart-melting redemption, smash that like button, share this story with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, dramatic, and emotionally explosive audio stories.